There are places where safety isn't a matter of strength or preparation. It's a matter of obedience. Civilization teaches us that rules exist to protect people. The woods teach something quieter. Rules exist because something else is listening. We draw lines, issue warnings, and pretend they're about weather or terrain. But they're really about behavior. About what happens when a human acts like a human, curious, kind, responsible, in a place that punishes those instincts. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am a state trooper with the Maine State Police. I've worn this badge for 23 years, all of them assigned north of Route 11, covering the unincorporated territories that don't show up on most maps. Timberlands, logging roads, old fire cuts, places where the forest has jurisdiction first, and we come in second. I'm recording this now because my incident report ends with a sentence Internal Affairs told me to remove. Now I know why. I patrol an area bigger than some states. A third of it has no cell coverage. Half of it has no permanent residents. In winter, the roads disappear under drifts that don't melt so much as subside. In summer, the trees close ranks and swallow sound. You can scream in those woods and never hear it come back to you. We don't call it wilderness up there. We call it managed land. That's the lie we tell ourselves so we can sleep. The first rule I was taught didn't come from the academy. It came from a man named Earl Donahue, who trained me my first winter. He'd been a trooper since before GPS, back when patrol routes were remembered instead of logged. Earl said, "If you see something where it shouldn't be, don't approach it. Don't mark it. Don't name it. Call it in and leave." He didn't explain why. None of the rules ever came with reasons. By my third year, I understood that the rules existed because someone had already died without them. The death they still whisper about is officially listed as a hypothermia exposure. Unofficially, we call it the Calder loss. Rebecca Calder, age 9, missing since February 2009. Last seen near Township T7R14 Wells, just west of the Penobscot headwaters. Her father broke Rule 3 trying to find her. Rule 3 is simple. Never respond to a call for help you didn't personally witness. He heard her voice. Everyone agreed on that part. He followed it into the trees. They found his boots 6 miles apart in opposite directions, neither with footprints leading to them. Rebecca was never recovered. That was before my time, but the rule stuck. It's passed verbally, never written. Reports avoid the word voice. They say auditory anomaly. That's one of the ways we keep the system functioning. I've enforced those rules more times than I can count. Sometimes I've hated myself for it. Northern Maine looks empty from the outside. Inside, it's crowded with old infrastructure, abandoned ranger stations, collapsed logging camps, snowmobile bridges that haven't seen maintenance since the 80s. The woods remember all of it. So does whatever lives between those structures. My jurisdiction includes stretches of forest where the trees grow thinner the higher you climb. Above a certain elevation, the wind scours everything clean. That matters. I didn't know why at first. I just knew the rule. Stay above the tree line after dusk if you can. We never wrote that one down either. The incident that broke me started like a routine welfare check. September. Early cold. The kind that smells metallic. A call came in from a satellite phone registered to the Granger family. Seasonal caretakers for a hydro monitoring station off Old Mill Spur Road. Husband, wife, 1 teenage son. Dispatch logged it as a lost hiker report. The sun hadn't come back before dark. I was closest. I took the call. Before I left, I followed protocol. I reviewed the verbal rules in my head. The way you say a prayer you don't believe in anymore. Rule 1. Do not search alone. Rule 2. Do not use names out loud after dark. Rule 3. Never respond to a call for help you didn't personally witness. Rule 4. If you hear footsteps matching your own, stop immediately. Rule 5. Do not pursue beyond marked elevation lines. Rule 4 is the one most people mess up. It's instinctive to keep moving. I met Warden Ellis at the trailhead. He'd been fish and wildlife for 30 years and had the posture of someone whose spine had learned to bend around fear instead of breaking under it. "You hear anything yet?" he asked. "No," I said, "and I don't want to." We moved in silence. Radios off. Headlamps angled down. The forest was too quiet, the way it gets before snow, even when there isn't any forecasted. Half a mile in, we found the first sign of violation. A sneaker, size 11, brand new, sitting upright on a stump like it had been placed there. Ellis didn't touch it. Neither did I. "That's his," Ellis said anyway. He shouldn't have said that. Naming is a kind of permission. We both knew it. We backed away, marked the location with reflective tape. No initials, just a number. That's when we heard the voice. It came from uphill, above the elevation marker. That alone should have ended the search. "Dad," it said. Ellis closed his eyes. I watched his jaw tighten like he was biting down on something sharp. It sounded wrong. Not distorted. Not animal. Just incomplete. Like a recording that hadn't finished loading. Rule 3 burned in my chest. So did my badge. "Trooper," the voice said, and that's when I realized it had switched targets. I had not spoken my name. I had not announced myself. Ellis whispered, "Don't answer." The voice tried again, closer this time, still uphill. I did something I had never done before. I said, "I hear you." That was the first violation. The woods reacted immediately. Sound changed. Distance collapsed. The slope ahead of us flattened in a way that didn't match the terrain. Trees leaned in, not physically, but perceptually, like depth had been reassigned. We moved backward, slowly, without turning around. Ellis started counting under his breath. Elevation markers, a coping habit. Then the radio on my shoulder crackled to life. "Daniel," it said, "that was impossible. Dispatch doesn't use first names." And the radio was off. Ellis looked at me with something like grief. "Don't," he said. I reached up anyway. I didn't answer. I just touched it. That was enough. The radio repeated my name, perfectly this time. My handwriting from old reports flashed in my head. Signatures. Names written. Names logged. That's when I remembered the limitation Earl had mentioned once, drunk and shaking, in a diner off I-95. "It needs you to confirm yourself," he'd said, "written or spoken. Otherwise it can't finish." I ripped the radio off my shoulder and threw it downhill. The voice followed it. We ran. Ellis tripped at the elevation line. He went down hard. I grabbed him. That was the second violation. Rule 5. We crossed below the marker together. Something moved where the radio had landed. Not toward us. Around us. Like it was redrawing the circle. Ellis screamed when it took his leg. No teeth. No hands. Just absence. Like a bad edit. I dragged him anyway. He lived. Barely. The Granger boy was never found. The report says we arrived too late. It doesn't say why the rules exist. Ellis lost the leg below the knee. The surgeons said it was a crush injury complicated by cold shock. That's what the paperwork says. There's no box to check for missing segment without trauma. The amputation was cleaner on the X-rays than anything a machine should be able to manage in the field. He never came back to duty. I visited him once in the rehab wing in Bangor. He wouldn't let me close the door. He kept his eyes on the hallway the whole time, like he was waiting for someone to finish approaching. I didn't hear it walk away, he told me. That's what gets me. Everything else walks away. After that, he stopped answering my calls. The Grangers packed up the station 2 weeks later. The parents didn't accuse us. That was worse. People who accuse you still believe the system works. They just think it failed them personally. The Grangers understood something else had happened. Mrs. Granger handed me her son's journal before they left. Said it didn't feel right to keep it. There was one entry circled in red ink. Something calls from the low places. It won't come up where the wind is. That line didn't make it into evidence. I burned the page behind the barracks and told myself it was because it wasn't relevant. After the Granger incident, the rules tightened. Not officially. Not in writing. Just fewer jokes at roll call. Longer pauses before volunteers spoke up. The older troopers started pairing off without being told. The younger ones noticed and followed suit. That's how this knowledge survives. Through imitation. Through what isn't said. Rule 6 was passed to me that winter by Sergeant Harlow, who had transferred up from Aroostook County. He leaned close in the locker room and kept his voice low, like the lockers themselves might be listening. "If you see tracks that stop without turning back," he said, "don't fill them in. Don't step over them. Go around. It notices when you complete things." I asked him how he knew. He said, "Because my partner thought he was helping. That was all." Winter came down hard that year. Snow early. Heavy. The kind that compresses sound and makes the forest feel upholstered. Patrols slowed. Calls thinned out. That's when it's most dangerous. Quiet invites curiosity. In January, a plough driver named Michael Avery went missing off a logging road near the Canadian border. 38 years old. 2 kids. Known for stopping to help stranded motorists even when it put him behind schedule. We found his truck idling in a drift. Door open. Heat still running. Tracks led away from the cab. Just one set. They stopped in the middle of the road. I stood there for a long time, staring at that empty snow. The rule about incomplete things itched at me. The urge to smooth it over, to make sense of it. I didn't. Avery was declared dead 3 months later. Exposure. That's the word we use when we don't have a body and need to give the family something solid enough to bury. His youngest started therapy for auditory hallucinations not long after. She said her father stood at the edge of her bed at night and asked why she wouldn't answer him. The therapists wrote complicated grief response. By spring, the pattern was clear to those of us who'd been paying attention. The thing, whatever name you want to avoid giving it, was expanding its perimeter, not moving exactly, learning, adapting to how we contained it. It exploited duty best, compassion second, curiosity last. That made us predictable. The first containment failure happened in May. A volunteer search and rescue group out of Millinocket crossed into our jurisdiction without notifying dispatch. Weekend training exercise. 4 adults. One 17-year-old cadet named Lucas Monroe. His mother worked records at the county office. I knew her. We drank the same burnt coffee every morning. They were overdue by 6 hours when the call came in. By then, the weather had turned. Rain in sheets. Fog rolling low through the valleys. Elevation lines blurred. Sound carried wrong. We staged at the fire cut and went in as a unit. 5 troopers. 2 wardens. 1 medic. The woods felt crowded. We found the CR group's packs lined up along a ridge trail. Neatly. Zippers closed. Boots placed beneath them, like a lesson diagram. Rule 1 broke itself. There were too many of us. Too much noise. Too much humanity moving together. "Lucas," someone called out. I turned so hard I nearly fell. Names after dark. In fog. Every rule was bleeding into the next. A response came immediately. Not a voice. Footsteps. They matched ours exactly. Pace. Weight. Even the uneven drag of Trooper Klein's left foot. Rule 4 screamed. "Stop," I said. Loud. Louder than I should have. Everyone froze. The footsteps took 2 more steps, then stopped. Silence pressed in. Rain on leaves. Breathing. Someone crying quietly. I didn't look to see who. "Back out," I said. "Now. Same spacing. Don't turn around." We made it 20 yards before Lucas ran past us. He was soaked. Shaking. Eyes too bright. He smelled like cold water and iron. "My mom's calling," he said. "She's down there." She fell. He pointed downhill. Below the ridge. Into fog. His radio crackled. "Luke," his mother's voice said. Clear. Familiar. The kind of voice you answer without thinking. He started toward it. I grabbed him. That was the 3rd violation. Physical restraint. We're not supposed to interfere once someone commits. The rule exists because resistance escalates the cost. Lucas fought me with the strength of someone who'd already decided to die. "You don't understand," he sobbed. "She knows my name." The fog parted downhill, just enough to show a shape. Human-sized, upright, waiting. It didn't wave, didn't call out again. It waited for permission. I made a choice I still replay in pieces. I said, "Lucas Monroe, you listen to me." The thing downhill shifted. Not closer. More complete. Lucas went slack in my arms. Janet opened the door anyway. That was compassion. That was Rule 3 breaking itself open again. The bus was found empty 2 hours later. Engine still warm. Footprints everywhere. Too many. Overlapping. Leading in all directions and none. They never found the kids. The official report blamed exposure and disorientation. The school district installed GPS trackers and emergency beacons. More technology. More rules that assume the threat is distance instead of intent. After that, the calls changed tone. Less panic. More resignation. People started saying things like, "I know I'm not supposed to, but," right before doing exactly what the thing wanted. It didn't need to lure anymore. It just had to wait for the rules to wear thin. Claire got pregnant in December. We hadn't planned on another child. The timing felt wrong. But when she told me, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched for years. A reason to stay above the tree-line. A reason to obey. I doubled down on the rules at home. No names after dark. No open windows. No answering unknown calls. No writing anything personal down where it could be seen from outside. Claire humored me. She always has. In February, my brother Mark came up from Portland for a weekend. He'd lost his job. Marriage on the rocks. Needed space. The woods had always calmed him. I told him not to hike alone. Told him to stay near the cabin. Told him the weather turned fast up here. He laughed. Same laugh as when we were kids, and I told him not to jump off the quarry ledge. "I'll be fine," he said. "I know how to listen." He went out anyway, just for an hour. At dusk, he called my phone. One ring. I stared at it until it stopped. Then it rang again. I picked up. "Danny," Mark said, "you gotta hear this. I think there's someone out here. They know your name." The world narrowed to that sentence. To the way he said "you're" like it was a gift. "Mark," I said carefully, "where are you?" "I'm on the trail," he said. "The old one by the cut. There's a guy down the slope. He fell. He's hurt bad." I closed my eyes. Rule 3. Rule 5. Every rule stacking up like cordwood. "Don't go down," I said. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." "Hurry," he said. "He keeps asking me to come closer. Says it's cold." The line went dead. I drove like I was trying to outrun my own thoughts. Snow whipping sideways. Headlights carving tunnels through dark that felt thicker than weather. I found Mark's truck parked wrong. Crooked. Engine off. Door open. His footprints led up the trail. One set. They stopped at the elevation marker. Below it, the snow was untouched. I didn't call his name. I didn't step forward. I stood there shaking, feeling the weight of every time I'd told someone else to walk away. "Daniel," a voice said from below. Mark's voice. Perfect. Warm. Familiar. I didn't answer. The voice tried again. Added something new. "Dad's here too," it said. "He says he's proud of you." That was the closest I came to breaking. Our father died 10 years ago. Heart attack. At home. No woods. No rules. I backed away. Slowly. Every step felt like tearing something loose inside me. The voice followed the line. Not crossing it. Just pacing. I left. Mark was declared missing. Another exposure. Another empty casket. Claire didn't ask why I didn't go after him. She knew better than to ask questions that only had answers she couldn't live with. The thing changed after that. Or maybe I just started seeing it clearer. It didn't want bodies. It wanted systems. It wanted us to keep choosing wrong for the right reasons until the rules collapsed under their own exceptions. Spring brought thaw, and with it, the smell of rot. Old things surfacing. Old structures emerging from snowbanks like bones. A maintenance crew went out to inspect a collapsed culvert near an abandoned ranger station. 3 men, all experienced, all briefed. They brought radios. They brought flares. They brought written maps. They wrote their names on their helmets in marker, like they always do. None of them came back. The ranger station burned that night. Electrical fire, they said. Total loss. No investigation. By summer, the woods felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. More patient. Command issued a quiet directive. Non-essential patrols suspended in certain sectors. Budget reasons. Safety concerns. We called it retreat. I started teaching new troopers the rules myself, carefully, watching their faces for disbelief, for fear, for the kind of curiosity that gets people killed. One of them, a woman named Reyes, asked me a question I hadn't heard before. "What happens if we stop enforcing the rules?" she asked. I thought about Ellis, about Lucas, about Mark, about the bus. "It doesn't stop," I said. "It just doesn't have to try as hard." That night, Claire woke me up. "There's someone outside," she whispered. "They're standing by the tree." I listened. White noise. Wind. Nothing else. "I think they're waiting," she said. "They know the baby's name." "That's my name," he whispered. "You said it." The fog surged uphill. We ran. We ran hard. Uphill. Toward wind. Toward exposure. Toward rules that still worked. Lucas screamed once when the fog touched his boots. Not in pain. In recognition. We didn't stop. At dawn, we were 3 people lighter. The report says Lucas broke formation and fell. It says the fog caused disorientation. His mother stopped coming to work. After that, the rules changed again. Rule 7. If a dependent is involved, you do not lead. You do not decide. You follow the highest elevation available. It's a bad rule. It gets people killed. But it delays worse outcomes. The thing learned faster than we did. By summer, it stopped calling from low places only. It started using structures. Old ranger cabins. Abandoned culverts. Anywhere human systems had left a shape behind. Infrastructure remembers us. I was promoted that August. Senior trooper. More paperwork. Less field time. That's how the system protects what it has left. By moving the ones who know too much into rooms with walls. I tried to warn my replacement, Trooper Ian Hale. 26. Smart. Earnest. His wife was 7 months pregnant. I told him the rules the way they were told to me. Quietly. In pieces. Without reasons. He laughed once. Just once. "Sir," he said, "with respect, that sounds like superstition." I didn't correct him. Superstition implies choice. The call that took him came 3 weeks later. Noise complaint near an old snowmobile bridge. Kids partying. Fires. Music. Human behavior. Human compassion. Human duty. He went alone. The bridge collapsed sometime after midnight. That's the official version. Structural failure due to rot. They found his cruiser parked properly. Lights off. Keys in the cup holder. His body was recovered downstream 2 days later, except it wasn't complete. His wedding ring was still on his finger. I attended the funeral in uniform, stood in the back, watched his wife cradle her stomach and whisper to it like she was trying to teach it a rule before it learned the wrong ones. That night, my phone rang at home. I answered without thinking. "Daniel," the voice said, "not from the woods, from inside the house." I didn't respond. I went upstairs and sat outside the nursery until morning, listening to my own footsteps echo back to me from rooms I hadn't entered. I didn't tell anyone about the call from inside my house. There's an unspoken understanding among us that once the boundary breaches domestic space, documentation stops being protection and starts being invitation. You don't file reports about things that listen for their own names in ink. Instead, I added a lock to the nursery door. Not for security, for sound. My wife, Claire, noticed. Of course she did. She notices everything. She asked me why I was walking the house at night, why I kept stopping mid-step like I'd forgotten something important. I told her work was getting to me. That was true, just incomplete. By fall, the internal guidance memos started circulating. Sanitized language. Phrases like risk-tolerant patrol adjustments and resource allocation efficiencies. Translation: fewer boots in the woods, more time behind desks, shorter search windows. Containment by attrition. Someone higher up had decided the losses were acceptable. That's when Rule 8 surfaced. Not from command. From a retired dispatcher named Maureen, who'd been routing calls up north since before I joined. She cornered me in the hallway one night after a late shift. "If you get a call that drops mid-sentence," she said, "don't call back. And if it calls again, you hang up after the first ring." I asked her why. She said, "Because it's learned how our phones work. It thinks interruptions mean urgency." I thought about the call from my house, about answering without thinking. That night, the phone rang again. One ring. I let it stop. Sleep became a negotiation after that. I learned which parts of the house carried sound and which swallowed it. I learned that the stairs echoed differently depending on whether someone was ascending or descending. I learned that my own footsteps could lie to me if I wasn't careful. Claire started sleeping with a white noise machine. Said it helped with the stress. It helped me too. In November, the first snow fell early again. The kind that erases tracks faster than you can document them. That's when the thing grew bold. A school bus broke down on Route 161. Engine failure. 15 kids. One driver. No injuries. Cold but manageable. Protocol said wait for the tow. Keep the kids inside. Radios on. The driver, a woman named Janet Lavoie, did everything right, until one of the kids started crying. She says her dad's out there, Janet told dispatch. Says he's waving. The bus cameras later showed nothing outside but snow and trees. No movement. No shapes. We hadn't told anyone yet. I got up, looked out the window. There was a shape at the edge of the yard. Not moving. Not calling. Waiting. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't speak. I stood there until dawn, counting my breaths, feeling the weight of every rule I'd ever broken pressing down on the ones I still obeyed. By the time the baby came, the woods had learned our schedules. That sounds like paranoia. I know how it reads. But patrols are patterns. School buses are patterns. Shift changes. Snowplows. Even grief has a timetable if you watch long enough. Whatever was out there didn't need to rush anymore. It could wait until we lined ourselves up. Claire went into labor during a late March storm. Wet snow. Heavy. The kind that pulls branches down and takes lines with it. Power flickered across the county all night. We drove to the hospital in Presque Isle with chains on the tires and the radio off. I didn't want to hear my name said by anyone who didn't have a face. Our daughter was born just before dawn. We named her Hannah. We did not say the name out loud until the sun was up and the wind had picked up enough to scour sound away from the windows. I stayed in the hospital room longer than policy allowed. Slept in the chair. Watched the hallway reflected in the glass of the incubator like it was a surveillance feed. Every time a cart rolled past, my body tensed. Claire noticed. "She's safe," she said gently. "You can stop working." I wanted to believe that the rules ended at the treeline, that whatever hunted behavior couldn't follow us into places built for healing. But hospitals have their own rules. Visiting hours, check-in desks, names written on whiteboards, human systems stacked on top of each other. On the third night, a nurse I didn't recognize came in to check vitals. She smiled too quickly, didn't look at the chart before touching Hannah's wrist. "What's her name?" she asked. Claire answered before I could stop her. The nurse repeated it, carefully, like she was tasting it. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loud enough to make the nurse jump. "I'll take it from here," I said. She blinked, confused, then embarrassed. She apologized and left. The chart later showed no record of her being on shift. We discharged early. Back home, I changed how I lived. I stopped going into the woods unless I absolutely had to. When I did, I stayed high. I stayed with others. I stayed quiet. It didn't matter. The calls kept coming. People hearing loved ones. People finding objects placed where they shouldn't be. Shoes. Phones, rings, always clean, always intact. The thing had learned presentation. Rule 9 emerged that summer after a volunteer firefighter named Tom Wilkes died during a brush fire containment. He followed a voice into smoke, thinking it was a trapped hiker. They found his helmet hanging from a branch at eye level, name written inside. Perfectly legible. Rule 9. If an object meant to protect is found intact and unattended, the person is already gone. We stopped searching after that. The public noticed. Of course they did. Response times lengthened. Search windows closed faster. The woods felt abandoned, and abandonment breeds anger. We became the villains. The ones who didn't try hard enough. At a town hall in Ashland, a man stood up and pointed at me. "My brother's out there," he said, "and you're telling me there's nothing you can do?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that there were things we could do, but every one of them made the problem worse. That effort was currency, and we were running out. Instead, I said what the system required. "We're doing everything we can." That was a lie. Everything we could do would have ended the pretense of control. By fall, Command started rotating troopers in from the south. Short assignments. 2 weeks. A month. People who didn't know the rules yet. They learned fast. Or they didn't last. Trooper Hale's replacement lasted 11 days. He followed a set of footprints that stopped at a culvert and didn't come back out. The culvert was filled with water when we checked it. Too much water. Flowing uphill. We sealed it with concrete. That night, the river flooded for the first time in recorded history. Containment failure doesn't always look like a breach. Sometimes it looks like collateral. Claire stopped letting me take Hannah outside after dusk. She didn't say why. She didn't have to. One night, while I was on shift, she called me. 1 ring. I answered anyway. "There's someone at the door," she said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "They say you asked them to check on us." My stomach dropped. "Do not open it," I said. "Do not speak to them. Go into the bedroom. Lock the door." "They know Hannah's name," she said. I closed my eyes. "The rules don't account for that. They never did." "Put the white noise on," I said. "As loud as it goes. Stay away from the windows." "I can hear footsteps," she said. "They sound like yours." Rule 4. Inside my own house. I abandoned the cruiser where it was and ran. No lights. No siren. I didn't want to announce myself to anything listening for patterns. When I got home, the porch light was on. I never leave it on. The front door was closed. Locked. No signs of entry. Inside, Claire was sitting on the bed with Hannah pressed to her chest. White noise screaming from the machine. Both of them shaking. "There was no one there," Claire said. But the footsteps kept moving. Around the house. Like they were checking. I did a perimeter sweep anyway. Flashlight angled down. No names spoken. In the mud by the foundation, I found footprints. My size. My tread. They circled the house, but never crossed the threshold. I understood something then that I'd been circling for years. It couldn't enter without invitation. Names were one kind. Doors were another. Rules weren't just barriers. They were contracts. That realization should have brought relief. It didn't, because contracts cut both ways. I started paying closer attention to how often we invited things in without thinking, how often we said names to comfort ourselves, how often we held doors for strangers because it was polite. Human compassion is an open door. The next containment failure was larger. A private logging company ignored the informal boundaries we'd been enforcing. New crew. New maps. No institutional memory. They cut a road straight through a high-elevation corridor we'd relied on for years. Dropped the tree-line by exposing soil and killing windbreaks. The thing adapted immediately. Disappearances tripled. Sound started carrying uphill. Whatever had been limited by elevation before now had new paths. We protested. Filed internal objections. Cited safety concerns. The response from Augusta was swift and final. "Your claims are unsubstantiated," the memo read. "Resource extraction will proceed." That's when I realized the system had already decided who was expendable. Trooper Reyes came to me 2 weeks later, pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "I followed the rules," she said. "All of them. and it still took him. Her partner, ambushed by nothing visible, just absence where his arm had been a second before. He didn't even break protocol, she whispered. So what's the point? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break her, so I gave her the only truth that still worked. The rules don't save you, I said. They slow it down. That night, Reyes transferred out. Good people were leaving, or dying. What stayed behind was habit. By winter, the thing stopped needing mistakes. It started exploiting compliance. People who followed instructions too precisely, who waited where they were told, who stayed put because help was coming. Help became a promise we couldn't keep. The final set piece before everything changed came in January, during a power outage that stretched across 3 counties. No heat, no lights, no cell service. We opened warming shelters in schools and community centers. Humanitarian response. Necessary. Dangerous. Hundreds of people gathered under one roof. Names signed in at the door. Children tagged with wristbands. I walked the halls all night, listening to the echo of my boots and trying to tell which footsteps belonged to me. At 2:17 a.m., the fire alarm went off in the East Wing. Protocol says evacuate immediately. Rule 10, which no one had ever said out loud but everyone knew, says never force a crowd to move at once in the dark. I hesitated. Someone pulled the alarm again. Panic surged. People surged with it. In the chaos, a little boy let go of his mother's hand. I saw him disappear into the press of bodies, his wristband flashing his name in reflective orange. I ran after him. That was duty. That was compassion. That was every rule breaking at once. I found him by the gym doors, crying, alone. Come on, I said, and I did not say his name. The lights flickered back on as we reached the exit. Outside, the snow had stopped. The boy looked past me and smiled. There you are, he said to someone behind me. I did not turn around. I pushed the boy into his mother's arms and backed away, keeping my eyes forward, my mouth shut, my name locked inside my head like a prayer. Behind me, footsteps followed for exactly 3 steps, then stopped. The fire was declared a false alarm. Electrical surge. No one mentioned the shadow seen on the gym wall that didn't match any human shape. The next morning, the shelter logs were missing. All of them. After the shelter incident, the word containment stopped meaning anything concrete. Before, it had implied borders, elevation lines, patrol limits, places you didn't go and things you didn't say. Afterward, it became abstract, behavioral, psychological, about reducing exposure rather than preventing contact. That's when the internal language shifted again. We stopped saying missing, that we started saying unrecoverable. It's a subtle change, but it matters. Missing suggests a future action. Unrecoverable closes the door without admitting why. I was called into Augusta in February, not for discipline, for consultation. That's how you know the situation has moved past denial and into risk management. They put me in a windowless room with 3 men and 1 woman I'd never met. No uniforms. No badges on the table. Just folders with my name printed cleanly on the front. You've had more exposure than most, one of them said. We want to understand best practices. Best practices. As if this were an accounting issue. I told them what the rules actually were. Not the sanitized versions that floated up through memos, but the ones learned through blood and absence. The ones that contradicted instinct. I watched their faces carefully, not for disbelief, for recognition. 2 of them already knew. "Is it intelligent?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said, "but not the way we are." "Does it have intent?" "Yes." "Does it have a goal?" I thought about that longer. "It wants participation," I said finally. "It wants us to keep choosing." They exchanged looks. That was when they told me about the other regions. Northern Quebec, the Ural forests, pockets of Scandinavia where search and rescue protocols quietly mirrored ours without ever coordinating. Different languages, same rules, same losses, different names, always older than the maps, always exploiting whatever counted as duty in that culture. "We believe it's fragmentary," one of them said, "distributed, not a single organism." "Then you're already thinking about this wrong," I said. "It doesn't need to be whole." They didn't argue. Instead, they slid a document across the table. It was a proposal, not a plan, a consideration. Consolidation of high-risk populations, voluntary relocation incentives, strategic withdrawal from certain corridors, controlled abandonment. They didn't use the word sacrifice, but it hung in the air like smoke. "You're asking me to help you decide who gets left behind," I said. "We're asking you to help us slow it," the woman replied. "At scale." That was the moment I realized enforcement had already failed. What remained was mitigation. I refused to sign anything. They let me walk out anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about how far along they were without me. Back home, Claire could tell something had shifted. "You're quieter," she said one night as we sat in the dark living room, Hannah asleep between us. "Even when you're here." I didn't answer right away. I was listening to the house, to the way it settled, to the way silence pooled in corners. "They're giving up," I said finally. She didn't ask who. "They're not calling it that," I continued, "but they're planning around losses instead of preventing them." Claire nodded slowly. "That's what people do when they're tired." The thing fed on that tiredness. In March, it started using children more deliberately. Not directly. Never directly. That would have triggered too much resistance. Instead, it arranged situations where children were adjacent to violations. A toddler wandering onto a trailhead alone. A teenager stranded after curfew. A school project that required recording family history out loud. Every scenario engineered to force adults into the same choice. Obey the rules or protect the child. No one obeys the rules when a child is crying. That's how it took Deputy Harris. Harris had 2 kids of his own, 8 and 10. He responded to a call about a lost girl near a campground. 6 years old, non-verbal, autism spectrum. He broke formation to follow a set of small footprints leading downhill. They found his radio later, battery removed, his name scratched into the casing with a rock. The girl was sitting at the campground entrance when her parents arrived, unharmed, clean. She had Harris's badge in her pocket. After that, I stopped pretending the rules were neutral. They weren't. They were moral traps, designed to force impossible choices so the system could remain intact while individuals absorbed the cost. I started keeping my own list. Not written, memorized. Things that still worked. Sometimes. Wind. Elevation. Crowds moving with purpose instead of panic. Silence without anticipation. And one thing that frightened me the most. Refusal. The thing didn't know what to do when you simply did nothing. Not retreat. Not advance. Not response. Just refusal. It was risky. Dangerous. But it disrupted the pattern. I tested it once. Carefully. A call came in from a hunting cabin near the Allagash. A man reported hearing his wife outside. She'd died the year before. Cancer. Hospice. At home. I drove to the access road and stopped there. I didn't proceed. I didn't call back. I didn't announce myself. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. The man called again. Voice shaking. Begging. I stayed where I was. At dawn, the calls stopped. We found the cabin later. Door closed. No sign of entry. The man alive, dehydrated, shaken. He said the voice had grown angry, then confused, then quiet. It was the first time I'd ever heard that sequence. Word of that spread, quietly, informally, through glances and pauses and conversations that ended mid-sentence. Refusal became an unofficial rule. Rule 11. If no action is required to preserve life, take none. It saved some people. It doomed others. Because sometimes action really was required, and the thing learned how to blur that line. The next escalation was infrastructural. Road signs went missing. Trail markers vanished. Elevation indicators were removed or repositioned. Not vandalism. Too precise. The forest started lying about itself. We couldn't tell people where the safe lines were anymore, because the lines no longer stayed put. A search team crossed what they thought was a ridge boundary and vanished into a low valley that shouldn't have existed. Satellite imagery later showed the terrain unchanged. But the team never came back. By May, the federal presence increased. Unmarked vehicles, temporary offices, contractors who didn't ask questions and didn't stay long. One of them, a man with a Western accent and tired eyes, spoke to me privately while we stood overlooking a clear-cut. "You know why it can't cross thresholds uninvited, right?" he asked. "Because it needs consent," I said. "Because it needs context," he corrected. "Names, roles, relationships. Without those, it's incomplete." I thought about how often we define ourselves out loud, how often we announce who we are and why we're somewhere. What happens if there's no context left? I asked. He looked at the clear-cut, at the way the wind moved freely now where trees used to anchor it. "Then it won't need permission anymore," he said, "because there won't be anything to violate." That was the first time anyone said it plainly. The goal wasn't to feed. It was to flatten. By summer, entire zones were quietly depopulated, not evacuated, just allowed to empty. Services withdrawn. Roads unmaintained. Power lines left down. People who stayed adapted or disappeared. I was ordered to relocate my family south. Claire refused. "This is our home," she said, "and it knows that." She was right. Running wasn't refusal. It was participation. So we stayed. We changed how we lived. No schedules posted. No names spoken outside. No doors opened without verification that didn't rely on sound alone. Hannah learned early not to respond when someone called her. That's a sentence that should never exist. In August, my phone rang while I was on patrol. One ring. I let it stop. Then my radio crackled. "Trooper Mercer," dispatch said. Official tone. Correct protocol. "We need you to respond to a welfare check. Possible domestic disturbance. Location. My address." I pulled over. "That's not possible," I said. "My family is accounted for." Silence. Then softer. "They say your wife is screaming." I closed my eyes. Rule 3. Rule 11. Every rule tearing at the same point. "I'm not responding," I said. There was a pause. Longer than it should have been. "Copy," dispatch replied. I drove home anyway. Not fast. Not slow. Deliberately. The house was dark. Quiet. Inside, Claire and Hannah were asleep on the couch. White noise humming. Door locked. No signs of disturbance. But on the kitchen table, written in my handwriting, was a note. "You came anyway." I burned the note in the sink, watched the ash curl and disappear. That was when I knew the final phase had begun. It wasn't just testing rules anymore. It was testing me. By the time the system admitted what it was dealing with, it had already redesigned itself around the damage. That's how institutions survive things they can't defeat. They absorb the loss, rename it, and move the boundary of acceptable harm just far enough that daily operations can continue. You don't stop the threat. You normalize it. Northern Maine became a gray zone. Not on maps. Not officially abandoned. Just thinned. Schools consolidated. Clinics closed. Response times doubled, then tripled. Patrol routes were re-evaluated until there was nothing left to patrol. The woods didn't expand. We retreated. I stayed because leaving would have been an answer, because every instinct I had told me that motion, any motion, was still participation. Refusal had to be consistent to mean anything. Claire understood that better than I did. She'd stopped asking me what I thought we were containing. She focused on how we lived. We became very careful people. No routines, no announcements, no names spoken outside the house, and sometimes not even inside. Hannah learned to recognize our faces before our voices, learned to wait, learned that silence was not absence. That's a skill no child should have. The final incident, the one that forced me to record this, didn't happen in the woods. It happened on pavement. A bus crash on Route 1. Southbound. Early morning fog rolling off the river. No fatalities at impact. Injuries, yes, but manageable. I was first on scene. I did everything by the book. Flared the road. Shut down traffic. Called in EMS. Then I heard my name. Not shouted. Not called. Said. From inside the bus. I froze. The driver was slumped over the wheel. Alive. Semi-conscious. No passengers calling out. No children crying. Just my name. Calm. Certain. I knew better. I also knew the rules had limits. They always had. If someone was trapped and alive, refusal became abandonment, and abandonment was the one thing the system still pretended it didn't allow. I approached the bus. The door hissed open. Inside, the seats were empty. Every single one. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just seatbelts hanging loose, gently swaying like they'd been unbuckled a moment ago. My name came again. Closer. From the back. I did not answer. I did not step forward. I stood in the aisle and let the moment stretch. That's when I noticed the writing. Names carved into the plastic seat backs. Dozens of them. Some deep. Some shallow. Different handwriting. Different tools. Some names I recognized. Some I didn't. All of them complete. That was the tell. The thing wasn't hunting anymore. It was cataloguing. EMS arrived. I backed out without saying a word. Let them take over. Let them explain later why the bus had been empty. That was the last field response I ever made. 2 weeks later, I was offered early retirement. Full benefits. No ceremony. The justification was stress-related. Accumulated trauma. Occupational hazard. They weren't wrong. What they didn't say was that I'd become a liability. People who know how rules fail are dangerous to systems that rely on belief. I took the retirement. We moved once. Not far. Higher ground. Wind exposure. Fewer trees close to the house. I still walk the perimeter at night. I still listen. The thing hasn't stopped testing me. It leaves things now. Objects that suggest choice. A glove on the steps, a shoe by the mailbox, a note written almost like my handwriting, but not quite. It never crosses the threshold. It doesn't need to. It knows I see it. That's enough for now. I'm recording this because the informal channels are failing. The people who used to pass the rules quietly are gone or tired or promoted into silence. The system has decided that ignorance is safer than preparation. It isn't. The rules don't save you. I need you to understand that. They delay. They disrupt. They make you less interesting. That's all. So listen carefully. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Do not respond to voices you did not witness, or not speak names in the dark, or not complete what has been deliberately left unfinished, or not confuse duty with obligation, or not assume help is always help. And if you ever find yourself certain that the right thing to do is also the thing that feels most human, stop. Wait. Refuse. Because it is patient. It is older than our rules, older than our maps, older than the idea that the world owes us answers. It doesn't need to win. It only needs us to keep choosing. If you're hearing this and thinking it doesn't apply to you, that you don't live near woods like ours, you're wrong. The woods were just where it learned.